It's good to be back in Melbourne. The last time I was here was for the World Economic Forum, and I'm sure many of you were on the streets. Then as now, the issue of what is freedom and whose freedom, I think, stays the defining issue of our times. And it's the freedom now of every form of life that has to be taken away if corporate greed has to continue to have the freedom to accumulate, appropriate, privatize the resources of this planet. The fact that the movements that you're all part of, that we are all part of, are starting to make a difference is clear from two things, but two very opposing responses. The first is everyone is now green. Every coal company, every oil company, every pesticide company, every GMO company, they're all green. And yet, while they want to be green, they also want to attack being green. So today, at some point when I find 10 minutes, I have to do a piece for The Guardian in the UK, because they showed a film or documentary on Channel 4, which used to be at one point a progressive channel. And this one is a program that says what the Greens got wrong. And it's a promotion of nuclear and genetically engineered crops. And they have absolutely no one in that documentary from the South except a woman called Florence Wambugo, who I have debated. I've debated her in Kenya, I've debated her in South Africa when we were launching the GMO-free campaign for South Africa. She works for the biotech industry. She represents BIO, which is the biotechnology industry organization of the world. Even there, they want to be both green and anti-green. And I think the most dramatic sense of fear of life in all its freedom is attempts like Monsanto's patent on the Terminator technology. Now, it's owned jointly by the government of the US and Delta and Pineland, which has now been bought up by Monsanto. The Terminator technology is a genetic engineering which releases a lethal toxin at the time of the formation of the embryo. And this toxin kills the embryo, so what you get is sterile seed. And the idea was first floated to prevent farmers from saving seeds, which is also the idea built into patent law. But, patent law has legal costs. You just terminate the seed and don't let farmers save seeds. Biologically, you've made sure farmers will come to you every year. But the problem is that Monsanto actually doesn't have the expertise for breeding. When I say it doesn't have the expertise, I mean it doesn't do the careful work that women have done, for example, over millennia, of carefully selecting seed. 99.9% breeding in the world has been done by farmers, especially women farmers. And their breeding was so brilliant that they bred for increasing diversity. So India, for example, had 200,000 rice varieties for all kinds of issues, Rices that you eat for lactation, rices that you eat for diarrheal care, different kinds of rice varieties, salt-tolerant rice varieties, which we've saved, and we distributed after the tsunami and after the super cyclone in Orissa. 30 years ago, they used to laugh at salt tolerance. You don't need it, you only need high yield. But yield in that monoculture of the mind that actually is a low output. So you increase the production of one monoculture and say, oh, we've got so much soya in the world. Well, if you cut down the Amazon forest, cover all of North America with soya, cover all of Argentina with soya, cover all of Brazil with soya, you'll have a lot of soya. Yeah? It's not a smart technology, it's purely the expansion of a monoculture. And the same goes for the green revolution in India. If you only plant rice and wheat, you'll have a lot of rice and wheat. But then you won't have the pulses, the oilseeds, the greens that are vital to a balanced diet. This false idea of producing more when you're actually producing less is linked to the illusions that come from the kind of worldview we're being dominated with. And the illusions work themselves out economically through measures like growth. And, fellow feminist Marilyn Waring wrote a very good book called If Women Counted. And she wrote it because she was an MP in New Zealand. And she said, every time I want money for childcare, they say we don't have money. And every time they want money for the military, there's all the money. So why does it happen that there's no money for people's needs and there's always money for militarization? And so she started to do research on how accounting was done and how growth was measured, and found out that actually the category of gross national product and gross domestic product was created during the war to mobilize finances to finance the war. And the definition of growth is, if you produce what you consume, then you don't produce. Which is why women's work doesn't count, which is why subsistence work doesn't count, and which is also why nature's work doesn't count. Because nature produces so much more than we can ever produce. Her economy is so much bigger than all our little tinkerings. And yet, because she produces what she consumes through recycling, it's not production and doesn't count in growth. What does count in growth is you chop a forest, you get growth. You grow a forest, you don't get growth. Yeah? You plant a seed and you get a crop and you save seed from it. Even though you have lots of seed and never a scarcity, you have no growth. But you put Terminator technology into seed, tremendous growth. You force farmers to buy seed every year, tremendous growth. And we've seen what it's done to India. 1997-98, Monsanto came in with genetically engineered BT cotton. And they started to put huge ads in the papers. I immediately called up our ministries and said, do they have the approval to sell this stuff? Because starting with the Convention on Biological Diversity, I'd been keeping very, very close watch on what is this industry doing. And my involvement really grew out of the fact that in 1987, I was invited to a meeting called Laws of Life in Geneva, and the industry was there. In 1987, there was no commercial product of genetic engineering. At that time, there was no GATT, but they were negotiating the Uruguay round of GATT. And the industry talked about how they needed this instrument in order to be able to impose patents on the world. And the only way they could get patents was through genetic engineering, because now you could claim you're making new life. And through that say, now I have an invention, therefore give me a patent. Something very interesting that Monsanto then owned up in 1995, that we were the patient, the diagnostician, and the physician all in one. We defined a problem, and for them the problem was that farmers save seeds. And we offered a solution, make it illegal for farmers to save seeds. That's 1987 is when I started Navadanya, the movement for seed saving in India, for one simple little idea that the freedom of the seed cannot be destroyed. Because seed is the very embodiment of life and culture. It is literally all of the past history of people, the past evolution, and the potential of all of the future unfolding. And the idea that you could just say, seed, you will not reproduce, just so Monsanto can keep selling seed every year, was so obnoxious to me. I sort of started saving biodiversity from my days in Chipko. My philosophy is that all life on earth has rights. All beings have rights. Everything has intrinsic value. And here were these companies saying, we are the creators of life on Earth. We are the owners, and the world will pay us royalty. And it got so bad that I remember when they first introduced hybrid sunflower in India, and I did a lot of work training farmers on what was free trade to show them it wasn't free trade, what did patents mean, what was genetic engineering, what are the companies trying to control our food system. And the farmers had asked me, so which is the worst company? At that time, Monsanto wasn't big. We're talking about the 80s. It was Cargill. Cargill was the big one. And they were in seed. Today, Monsanto has bought up Cargill's seed business. And Cargill is the biggest trader in grain and food products. But at that time, Cargill was the big seed corporation. And when the farmers wanted to know which is the worst company, and I told them at that time it's Cargill, and I described what they do. We had a visit from Carla Hills, who used to be the trade representative of the US. And she had come and given a speech in 1988 saying, crowbar by crowbar, we are going to make sure we dismantle the protection that India has and prevents us and our companies from investing. Crowbar by crowbar, we are going to dismantle your economy. So I just forwarded a note to the farmers and said this is what they are saying. Well, there'd been a failure of the sunflower seed, and the farmers literally took a bus full of crowbars and brick by brick brought down this Cargill factory and said, okay, every time you will use crowbars to open up for your corporations, we will pack them up and send it back to you. And after that, there was a big debate, and I remember a press conference in Bangalore, and the chief of the Asia-Pacific region of Cargill had come in, and he says, the Indian peasants are so stupid, they don't understand. We are bringing new seeds that prevent the bees from usurping the pollen. I mean, pollination is the way we get seeds, the way we get reproduction, the way we get future generation of plants. And they've defined bees as the usurper of pollen. And no wonder they don't care that with pesticides and with Bt crops, bees are disappearing. Because Bt, you take a toxin from a soil organism, put it into the plant, and now there's poison being produced by the plant all the time. And it's interesting, when it comes to saying this is a pest control technology, Monsanto will say this is a poison and a toxic. And when it comes to safety, they say, no, 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 it's totally harmless. It's the same as nature made. The other category that is genetically engineered, in all these 20 years of Offers of Miracle, the only other category of crop we have in genetic engineering is the herbicide-resistant crops, where you spray more herbicide. And while Bt crops were supposed to control pests, the herbicide-resistant crops were supposed to control weeds. In the case of herbicide resistance, we have so much emergence of resistance in weeds that you were supposed to control, that you have super weeds, and we had predicted this at the beginning of the introduction of these crops. In the US, 5.4 million acres are now under super weeds, and Monsanto in this season is paying between $6 to $20 to farmers to use even more noxious herbicides from other companies, which the contract says the farmer can't touch, but now Monsanto is saying, use the other stuff, including Agent Orange-like herbicides, to be able to destroy the weeds. Bt cotton was supposed to control the bollworm. Now, we never had the bollworm as a pest till the American hybrid cotton came to India, and with it, it brought the American bollworm. They said genetic engineering will solve this problem. The bollworm is already resistant to the genetically engineered cotton. The costs of the seed jumped from 5 rupees to 3,200 to 600 rupees a kilogram, of which 2,400 was a royalty payment. We've had antitrust cases. Our foundation has intervened along with the government of Andhra Pradesh, and the price was forced to come down. Monsanto is again challenging and saying we have the freedom to charge what we want because this is our intellectual property. And we are arguing to saying the price of seed affects the farmer. The right to have seed at affordable prices is a fundamental right, and the state has a duty under our acts, the seed laws, etc. So it's a very interesting case. It's basically an antitrust case that's going on right now. Now, in the case of the herbicide tolerance, I remember the Convention on Biological Diversity negotiations. I would describe to the negotiators what the herbicide tolerance is, because they have wonderful words for it. They'll never tell you it's about Monsanto getting to spray more Roundup while also selling more Roundup-resistant seeds. And the head of Monsanto got up and said, we have a technology that is preventing weeds from stealing the sunshine. So I keep thinking, there's this concept they have in which the freedom of the corporation is based on the fear of everything that is alive and free. Yeah? And everyone's a thief. Bees are thieves. Plants are thieves. Farmers saving seeds are thieves. And the actual pirates, who are the ones who take patents on what exists. The biopiracy of neem, of basmati, of wheat that we have fought for so long. They live in such a paranoid world. And no wonder they have to create more and more lethal weapons to deal with our food production. And the weapons keep failing in their objective. Instead of controlling weeds and pests, we have super weeds and super pests. And yet, the propaganda carries on. Without GMOs, the world won't be fed. I love they wrote a recent paper. They've got about 3 scientists in their hire who will write on their behalf using Monsanto data. A few years ago, they responded to the fact that we had shown there was a connection between the creation of seed monopolies, the introduction of GM cotton, and the rates of farmer suicides. There are 200,000 suicides of farmers in India since 97-98. Most of these are concentrated in the cotton belt. Most cotton is now Monsanto cotton, under the monopoly they have evolved. And so they first got IFPRI to write a paper, there was no connection, and then they actually wrote and said, and in the cases where the suicides are correlated with BT, it's not because of the BT cotton, it's because the environment is wrong. Then why did you sell these seeds in those environments? That's something they never answer. The more recent paper is wonderful. They're talking about liberating Indian women through genetic engineering. And the argument is, women are now working on picking cotton in large numbers. Well, there are 2 reasons they're doing it. There's only cotton. We used to earlier grow in those areas. We'd grow cotton along with sorghum and tur and foods. So 90% used to be food, 10% used to be cotton. 90% of women's work was related to food production, food processing. Now it's 100% related to cotton picking. And then they go on to argue, and since women are cotton picking, the husbands are looking after the babies and cooking the meals. And I had to write a response to say, no, the reason the burden of cotton picking is all on women is not because there's someone helping them with childcare, but the husband has committed suicide because of the debt that Monsanto got into. And I've written this response. It should be available on our website, navdanya.org, for anyone who wants to follow up. Now, the level of false claims has gone so high that Monsanto in this season has lost 47% of its share value. That's about half. And You know, Einstein had a very, very powerful saying that said, a sign of insanity is to keep doing the same thing again and again, expecting a different outcome. So what Monsanto does is BT fails, they make BT2. Roundup fails, they make Roundup 2. I read in the paper this morning, one of the Australian newspapers, that the Australian government has declared smart stacks as safe. Now, what is smart stacks? It is 8 genes for herbicide resistance and Bt toxin. 8 genes. You stacked up 8, and you somehow imagine that when each of them failed individually, the 8 together will produce a miracle cure. I believe that since Monsanto has reduced our challenge by 50%, we must complete the remaining 50% of the work. I'm seriously building a Monsanto disinvestment campaign for next year. Along with the Monsanto boycott campaign. If you have money, disinvest. If all you do is eat, don't eat the stuff. And of course, they will carry on to say without GMOs there will be no cure to hunger. But I think their false claims are really catching up, and a sign of this catching up is Oxford University profs have been hired to start attacking us now. There's a book called The Plundered Planet. I bought it thinking it will be about the plunder of the planet. No, it's about how organic farming is the biggest threat to the planet. And of course, they have no evidence, no proof, nothing. There is proof through the International Assessment of Agricultural Science and Technology for Development, which is the equivalent of IPCC for agriculture. 400 scientists working for 4 years, looking at every bit of published literature in agriculture to see what's performing best. And they've said neither the Green Revolution nor genetic engineering have any promise for the future. If we've got to address issues of food security, it's only through ecological systems. And the ecological systems include traditional systems, and they include the new wave of ecological farming with all the new things we know about the complexity and diversity of soil organisms, including the fact, my book, Soil Not Oil, I wrote it because we were both doing research on what's happening with the recycling of carbon between chemical farming and organic farming. And we found in certain cases, depending on your cultivation system, the amount of density of biomass, the amount of diversity of biomass, in certain cases there's 200% difference between a chemical farm and an organic farm. And the difference is highest in the desert areas of Rajasthan. We can, by shifting to organic, pull out of the atmosphere 30% of carbon dioxide. Shifting to organic, we can bring to zero the emissions of nitrogen oxides that come from synthetic fertilizers. Even more important, by shifting to ecological farming and stopping factory farming and the torture of animals, we can get rid of a large chunk of methane. It's not all cows that are a problem. It's the imprisoned cows that are a problem. Imprisoned cows fed grain when the cow's stomach was designed for grass. That's what's causing methane emissions. But not only is organic farming a solution to climate change, it's also a solution to hunger. So much of the work we've done in Navdanya, now we monitor our farms, we monitor the farmers' production, income, etc. We're getting 3 to 5 times more output per acre compared to chemical farming. And incomes of up to 10 times higher. In the area with the GMO cotton, the organic farmers were working with us. And talking about organic farming working with us, we built solidarity campaigns. Some Spanish designers picked up some organic cotton and made some bags. Monsanto is now attacking those designers to say, how dare you talk about the suicides in India? And of course, I've said this is a perfect opportunity, and I have to keep writing their responses, but this is a perfect opportunity for the world to know the violence that corporations like Monsanto are unleashing on the world. The wrong measure, and it comes out of the monoculture of the mind, is you'll just look at a one commodity and say, oh, I've produced more of it. But you've reduced the biodiversity, and biodiversity was production. So when you take biodiversity into account, food output per acre is higher in biodiverse ecological systems. And we are now evolving two very, very important indicators. One is health per acre, where how much per acre are you producing in terms of nutrition and health? And of course, the chemical systems are not producing nutrition because the food is empty, it's just mass. And they're actually producing ill health with all the cancers. Punjab, the land of the Green Revolution, has a cancer train that leaves. Because so many of the farmers of Punjab have cancer today. The pesticides are in the water, the pesticides are in the food, the pesticides are in their bodies with the spraying, and they don't know that this is poison because it's called a dawai, which means medicine. You know, when it's translated into Indian languages, pesticides are called medicines. So, in fact, when I was called to Punjab for the suicides, and I was walking in the fields, and I stop and see these farmers carrying these huge spray cans, and I said, what are you carrying? And he'll say spray, a spray, in Punjabi, a spray. And I said, do you know what it is? He said, yeah, dawai. And I'll tell him that it's a poison. And he said, oh, now I understand why I get so dizzy while I'm spraying. I understand why I have to rest for 4 hours after I get back home. And an old man said, oh, now I understand why the mango in our villages has stopped flowering. Because now he understood that this poison had killed the pollinators. But just like there's freedom of the seed that needs to be stopped in order for the corporations to profit more, the freedom of the rivers needs to be stopped. We have a huge struggle in India on our sacred Ganges, where about 4 years ago, whenever Paul Wolfowitz was a World Bank chief for a short while, he came to give India $40 billion. World Bank was trying to privatize the water supply of Delhi. The water was coming from the Ganges, 300 miles away. And we had a huge campaign saying, our Mother Ganga is not for sale. And when Wolfowitz came to push this, all the women got together, and we had women with pots on their heads, the trade unions from the water works, a very, very diverse set of people protested. We collected signatures throughout. I think it was about 2 kilometers long piece of cloth, like a referendum. People saying, no, we want to retain water as a commons, as a public good. We won't let it be privatized. And the World Bank started to get nervous and wanted a meeting, and so I said, of course I'll come. And I gave to Paul Wolfowitz a little copper pot, because in copper water stays pure, copper pot of Ganges water. And I said, that's for you to keep next to your bed, to remind you that for most of the world, not only is water not a commodity, it is sacred. So keep your hands off it. And we stopped the privatization of Delhi's water. Now there's an attempt, because I'm sure it's the absolutely same thing in Australia as it is in India, because the same everywhere. The construction lobby wants to find anything they can cover with concrete. Any little inch of soil where they can put concrete. And so they want to build dams and diversions. 200 dams in my region in the Himalaya on the Ganga and its tributaries. We've stopped it for the time being because of a fast unto death by one of our really 85-year-old scientists called G.D. Agarwal. And we have a major campaign on saving the Ganga. But I know you have a campaign in the Murray-Darling Basin, because with current use, the river is dying. Just as with current use, the Ganga is dying. Now, climate change is adding another threat besides the fact that you're killing the river with dams and diversions and extractions. You also have the unpredictability of the weather. Last year we had such an extended drought, and we did a major survey on what's happening to the villages in Ladakh and in my region. Now, my region is very wet, but it wasn't getting rain. Ladakh is a dry, high-altitude desert. It got so much rain 5 years ago and so much rain this year that people died. You had flash floods. Villages got washed away. 200 people were washed away this year when the Indus Basin was flooding also in Pakistan. So we know we're going to have more unpredictable weather. And therefore, we have to have higher levels of resilience. And you definitely have to have lower demands on water. And what I've heard since I came 2 days ago, in every discussion, whether it's a TV interview or any other discussion, is this panic that if we don't waste water on agriculture, then we can't produce food. And nothing could be further from the truth. Only industrial farming requires the kind of water that is being wasted. Intensive irrigation goes hand in hand with intensive chemical inputs. Ecological farming can reduce water use dramatically. First, because you have a higher diversity of crops and you don't focus on the water guzzlers, like hybrid cotton and rice in Australia. Why on earth? There are enough good regions that produce rice. So a shift to water-prudent crops is one solution. And, so much of this continent is a low rainfall continent. It has all the plants. It will tell you. Aboriginals will tell you what would be the right agriculture. I'd love to send ragi and mandua, which are the millets which use only 250 millimeters of water, and give you 40 times more nutrition in the vital elements of trace elements and minerals. But organic farming, ecological farming adds to the water in your soil, up to from 10 to 20%. And this research now on increasing the water holding capacity of soil is now abundant. So the same actions that allow farmers to become free of corporate control and produce more food are actions that allow agriculture to stop being a climate problem and start becoming a climate solution. And the same actions are needed to save our rivers and keep them alive. So the freedom of the seed, the freedom of the river, and the freedom of people are one continuum in the new freedom that we seek. And at the end of it, people get worried and say, oh my God, how do you face these corporations? They're so big. I say, how are they big? They're just 5. 5 is small. 300 million species is big. 6 billion people on the planet is big. That's where we need to build our strength. Thank you.